Our next speaker is Marie Durina. Marie is the Senior Forensic Document Examiner at the San Diego Sheriff's Crime Laboratory. Ms. Durina joined the Sheriff's Crime Lab in 1998 as a forensic evidence technician, began her training as a forensic document examiner in 2003 under the tutelage of Dr. Linton Muhammad. She was promoted to forensic document examiner in 2005 and to senior forensic document examiner in 2011. She's a diplomat of the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners. She's a member of the American Society of Question Document Examiners, a member of the QD section of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, a member of the Midwestern Association of Forensic Sciences, a member of ASTM, and she's also a member of SWGDoc. So, Marie Durina.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you. It's quite an honor and privilege to be here and present my little research project. That is the Brooklyn Bridge, by the way, for those of you who don't recognize it. And the reason it's there is because the handwriting samples I'm going to be talking about today originated in Brooklyn from writers who were trained to write about 50 years ago in Brooklyn, New York. So it's a very specific group of writers we'll be talking about. And my project was actually inspired by some earlier research done by Dr. Srihari, who we'll be hearing from later today. His paper entitled The Individuality of Handwriting was published in the Journal of Forensic Science in July of 2002. And in that study, Dr. Srihari examined writing samples from over 1,500 writers throughout the United States. And he obtained 3 samples of a 156-word document. 3 were obtained from each writer. And he used computer software known as Cedar Fox to analyze and compare the writing by extracting certain features from those writings. Dr. Srihari's results, and I'll just quote from his paper if he doesn't mind, we were able to establish with a 98% confidence that a writer can be identified. And by considering finer features, we should be able to make this conclusion with a near 100% confidence. And all that was well and good. However, in July of 2003, there was a commentary published in the Journal of Forensic Science by Professor Michael Sachs from Arizona State University. And he criticized Dr. Srihari's study by calling it wrong-headed. He felt that the group of 1,586 writers was too large and too diverse. He also felt that the size of the document of 156 words was too large of a document and artificially maximized the ability to distinguish writers. So, in other words, the source document should have been shorter. And he also criticized it finally by saying the use of the Cedar Fox software did not really tell us how well or poorly human examiners would perform. So, as Dr. Kam mentioned earlier, it's always something that's wrong with the studies that we try to do, right? He concluded by saying, Professor Sachs did, that a study of handwriting individuality would be far more convincing if the writers in the sample had all grown up in the same neighborhood, gone to the same school, and had been taught to write by the same teachers. This slide is noteworthy because that pretty much sums up my research project in a nutshell, because this is exactly what I did. If we go forward a little bit, in 2008, we were treated to more of the same criticism, different day, different venue, this time in the Vanderbilt Law Review. Again, Michael Sachs again criticizes the identification in forensic sciences in general, and again trots out his criticisms of Dr. Srihari's individuality of handwriting study. He says Srihari had not found that each writer could be distinguished with certainty from other writers, even though the design of the study made the likelihood of finding such distinctions unusually large, given, again, the design of the sample did not come from homogeneous writing communities. It was too diverse, and again, did not involve human examiners, so therefore it could not tell us how well or poorly humans could distinguish one writer from another. So this begs the big question: can forensic document examiners distinguish one writer from another? Can we do what we say we can do? And can we do it, especially if we're faced with writings that come from the same homogeneous group of writers? In other words, the people who were trained to write under the same method, from the same neighborhood, by the same teachers? And if we can do it, how accurate would we be? Okay, this is just a very tiny lesson that we need to know a few things about handwriting systems in the United States. So we have a little history lesson here. Prior to after 1840 until about 1925, the dominant handwriting system in the United States of America was the Spencerian writing system. And we still see this today in the Coca-Cola, the original Coca-Cola logo, and the Ford Motor Company logo. Very beautiful, very elegant writing, however, very tedious and time-consuming to write. A lot of feathering, a lot of shading, predominantly used with fountain or quill pens back there. But this was the system that was in existence from about 1840 to 1925. In the late 1800s, Austin Palmer developed a new writing system known as the Palmer method. And this was designed to be easily executed, very legible writing, rapidly executed, and not using as many muscular movements. So it was great because this was in the middle of the Industrial Revolution when people were still keeping their business journals by hand. They were all handwritten. The typewriter had not really caught on yet. It was just beginning to be mass marketed. So the Palmer system of writing really began to catch on in the United States. And here's what that system looked like. Not quite as tedious to write as the very ornate Spencerian that came before it. And if we look at this, the copybook model, as forensic document examiners would call it, we see we have a lot going on here by way of class characteristics, even within the model of the writing. We have 3 versions of the uppercase F, 2 versions of the uppercase T, 3 versions of the uppercase R and 2 versions of the lowercase r, and 3 versions of the uppercase P. So just with class characteristics alone, we have quite a bit going on. This Palmer method caught on like wildfire, beginning first in the Catholic schools in the United States and then spreading to the public schools. So by the time Mr. Palmer passed away in 1927, it's estimated over 25 million Americans had learned to write using the Palmer method. I learned this method in 1963, so we can only imagine how many millions more learned it between the 1920s and the 1960s. So that brings us to the research project. The research project was really 3 phases. First, I had to find adults who were trained as children to write using the Palmer method in the same school and around the same time period. And then I had to get present-day writing samples from them. So we're talking about writers who are in their anywhere from their 50s to 60s, and I also got some Catholic nuns who were now in their 80s who taught us. Secondly, I had to find forensic document examiners who would be willing to analyze and compare the questioned writing specimens from these writers with the known writing specimens. And finally, I had to collect and score the examiner's answer sheets for accuracy, and I had to evaluate whether or not the examiners were able to find enough similarities or differences so that they could determine authorship. In cases where they were unable to do it, I attempted to determine where errors occurred and attempted to determine if there was any correlation between certain factors and the examiner's error rates. So, the questions I sought to answer was, is there a high degree of inter-writer variation among writers, even in populations where the driving forces for variation are low? In other words, people who are all trained by the same teachers around the same time using the same method. And among these populations, would document examiners be able to extract features from the writing samples to enable them to attribute authorship successfully? And finally, do factors such as an examiner's years of experience, their geographic location, or the number of words in a question document affect the examiner's error rates? So how would I find the answers to all of these questions? Well, for me, that meant I had to go back in time, back to the place I grew up where I learned to write under the Palmer method. I had to go back to Brooklyn, New York. Okay, Brooklyn, New York, where I spent my childhood and part of my early adulthood. For those of you not familiar with Brooklyn, it is one of the 5 boroughs of the great city of New York, right across the river from Manhattan. And we're not only going to Brooklyn to get these writing samples, we're going to a very specific neighborhood, the conjoined neighborhood of Bay Ridge Sunset Park. And back to my Catholic elementary school, Our Lady of Perpetual Help Elementary School, built in 1903, still there today, houses grades 1 through 8. And we hear a lot about classroom overcrowding, especially in California. My 3rd grade class had 75 students. That was just one class, ruled with an iron fist by one nun. So that's kind of funny to me that we hear a class of over 15 in California are considered overcrowded. But this is where Palmer method of handwriting was strictly enforced through drills and exercises, and we dared not deviate from the copybook model. And if we did, we would get our hands wrapped with a very rough crack of the ruler. Student demographics in the 50s and 60s, when these writers learned to write, consisted mainly of families who were descendants of Irish, Italian, Norwegian, Polish, Chinese, and Puerto Rican immigrants. Most of these students were 1st or 2nd generation Americans. It was not unusual at all as a child to go into my childhood friend's home and hear any number of accents being spoken either by parents, if not certainly by grandparents. All students who attended the school were of the Roman Catholic faith, and many of them back then came from large families, having 3 to 10 siblings, some even more. Okay, a little bit about the writing samples. I contacted the former students by email and through the school's website. I wrote to the current school principal, who was able to put me in touch with some of our retired teachers who are now Sisters of St. Joseph living at the convent in Brentwood, Long Island. I contacted that convent. My own sister attended her high school reunion and had many contacts with some former elementary school students who attended around the same time we did. And my childhood friend who lives in Brooklyn, New York, is still in contact with many of the, I'll call them kids, we grew up with, who are now, of course, in their 50s. My mother was, who's currently 94, was 91 at the time of this project, and even she got involved because I was discussing with her how strictly we were taught penmanship. Penmanship was treated as a regular course, just like math or science or English. And we were speaking about this, and my mother got up and toddled over to her very important papers and pulled out a folder of 60 report cards for all of her 5 children, grades 1 through 12, and this is my 3rd grade report card that I was able to pull from the group. And I really just want to point out, we were graded in penmanship, just like any other subject. Beginning in 3rd grade, we started as either satisfactory or unsatisfactory. I was satisfactory minus, but was able to work my way up by the end of the term. And we learned cursive in 3rd grade, beginning with a pencil and graduating to a fountain pen. If you were able to get a satisfactory grade, you were allowed to write with a fountain pen. And beginning in 4th grade, we were graded A through F, just like any other subject. So they were pretty serious about teaching penmanship back in those days. So I contacted the writers, and I got 1 sample each from each of them, the 86-word London letter. And for those of you who are not familiar with the London letter, it is a sample document that forensic document examiners have been using for many years because it contains all of the letters of the alphabet, upper and lower case, as well as all of the numerals 0 through 9. So that was the known writing. The questioned writing became a separate sheet where the writers were asked to write something about the memories they had about learning to write Palmer back in the days. I received back 52 known specimens and 43 question documents. And the reason for this discrepancy is many of the writers no longer write cursive. So while they were willing to give me a very beautiful Palmer penmanship sample of the London letter, when they wrote the comments, they printed. And especially, I had 6 males in the study. It seems all the boys don't write cursive anymore, and would say things like that in their commentary. I never use cursive. This was difficult for me to remember how to write. So I had a number of people who chose to hand print, and I guess I should have been more specific and said write everything in cursive. So here's the breakdown of my respondents. I had 34 female students, former students, 6 males, 12 nuns who taught us. Total writers, 52. Left-handed, only 2. Left-handed writing was strongly discouraged back then. You just didn't do it. If they did, those nuns would try to cure you of your left-handedness. 49 right-handed. 1 ambidextrous. I had a female writer, I believe this was a nun, who said she was forced to write. She was born and did everything left-handed, but when she attended school, she was forced to write with her right hand, so now she can write with both. So the nuns learned to write between 1927 and 1941, and the students learned to write between 1955 through 1969. Some limitations. I did not observe the act of writing. This was all done by mail. All samples, except one, were written with ballpoint pens. I did not control the brands used. I had no knowledge of the writer's mental conditions, physical limitations, or mental states. And many of the question documents were written in a less formal style than the knowns. It seemed they really focused on that London letter and tried to give me their very best Palmer penmanship. But when they wrote the commentary, they just dashed off very carelessly and very sloppy. So we had 2 differences in styles going on here. The forensic document examiner participation consisted of 49 forensic document examiners from several countries. These examiners worked from photocopies and digital PDF images that I had scanned in and sent along with photocopies. I sent a CD with the digital images. The question documents varied in length, and some of them were very limited. Some of them were as few as 7 words. The content in the question document was not directly comparable to the known document. Again, the known was the London letter, and the questioned were just their random thoughts about memories they had learning to write. The format of the answer sheet did not mimic casework. Examiners who did these examinations could not be inconclusive. They could be inconclusive, but if they left an answer blank or wrote a question mark, that was marked as an incorrect answer. So either they made the match and picked an author, or they didn't. The examiners did not like this at all. So I didn't make a bunch of friends out there during this research study. Okay, so let's look briefly at some of the examples about what we're talking about, the specimens of Palmer writing. And they kind of range. The one on top, I would say, adheres pretty strictly. This is one of the sisters who taught us. And the nuns always have the beautiful, most perfect Palmer writing. This nun learned to write in 1941. Below that, there's still quite a bit of influence of the Palmer system going on there. A student who learned to write in 1963. We had a number of families participate in this project. Here we have 3 sisters. The top is learned in 1963, the middle in 1967, and the bottom one in 1969, where we can only guess that they began not to crack that student's knuckles as hard as they cracked ours. The one in the middle is a left-handed writer. It doesn't really look like left-handed writing because we were required to turn the paper. If you were left-handed, you had to make your writing appear as if it had a right-handed slant. So that is a left-handed writer who was had to mimic right-handed writing. Same family, we have the brothers. Same grade, different class. Both learned to write Palmer in 1966. 2 best friends, together, lived on the same street, both children of Irish immigrants, spent lots and lots of time together. Their writing does look a bit similar. We're together from grades 1 through 12. So we had a few best friends in the study. And then, of course, there's the nuns. The nuns had quite interesting writing, often very, very nicely executed writing. Here I have two of the nuns, and I would imagine any document examiner would look at these and see a great deal of similarities, with the exception of the one on top is a bit above the baseline. But other than that, to me, that writing looks very similar. One learned in 1941 and the other in 1946. Very nice Palmer writing. Okay, now a bit about the examiners, who I'm so grateful chose to put their reputation on the line and make these forced calls. These are the rules the document examiners were told up front when the study began. This is all the things that were given to them. They knew there were 52 knowns and 43 questions. They were told all writing is natural. There's no disguised writing here. Each writer wrote only one known specimen, one London letter each. Every writer did not write a question document. There was going to be 9 more knowns than there were questioned. And they were told every question document will have a known specimen associated with it. So there were no tricks here going in. 49 examiners participated in the study. All of them were given a minimum of 1 month. Some took up to 3 months. If they were asked for an extension, they received it, because while these experiments are fun, we do have this thing called casework that kind of gets in our way. Many examiners remarked that they found the exercise quite challenging. Many examiners, I got many heated phone calls and emails about not liking this forced call business. They wanted that safe harbor of being inconclusive and didn't feel they should be penalized if they were inconclusive. That didn't go their way, but I do think it made a lot of people dislike me. I think some are still angry with me. Okay, so how did the examiners perform? 49 out of 49 answer sheets were returned. 15 stated they were peer-reviewed by at least one more examiner. The lowest score was 85%, the highest 100. The most frequent score was 100%. Combined average score, 98% for the group. So they did very well for themselves. Okay, when errors did occur, many times they involved the same question document. But oftentimes that same question document was mismatched with a different known partner. This is just a graphic representation of the scores. With regard to experience, the examiners were separated into 2 groups, those with 10 years experience or less, and those with over 10 years experience. If we look at the top, the top line floating around the 100 percentile range, we see all those little P's floating up there. Those are the examiners who engaged in peer review. Every single examiner who engaged in peer review got a perfect score. So that might indicate that peer review is of some value. With regard to experience, however, we see that experience didn't matter that much. We were kind of all over the map there. We had some examiners making errors even though they had 10 years experience or less, but we do have examiners up near 35 years and 40 years of experience also making errors. These were usually as a result of them not making the forced call. They would rather take the hit and be wrong and marked incorrect or put a question mark rather than make an incorrect call. So that is I would imagine, the more training they had, the more cautious they were in making the forced call. We had a few problematic samples. In this study, K32, the number 32 was for some reason the bad luck number. I had the most errors associated with the known document 32 and the question document 32, which they really had nothing to do with one another, but for some reason that was my bad luck number. K32, 11 errors and 12 for Q32. followed to a lesser degree by Q28 and K9. These were my problem children in the study for some reason. And again, 32 was the bad luck. And here's, just so you guys can have a look at it, here is K32. What is up with K32? I can only imagine that people may have been selecting class characteristics and finding similar class among writers. This was one of the ones that did not have an associated question document, but it was erroneously paired many, many times. It was my highest source of error in the study. Q32. This is one of the examples where we talked about the differences in style. If we look at the known document associated with this writer, we see she's written in a much more formal style, where her comments to me about learning to write seem to be dashed off very quickly and very carelessly. But again, this was another source of error. People mismatched that one. Q28, a source of error to a lesser degree, but I'd like you just to read what this writer has to say about remembering learning to write, because this gives you some idea about how strictly adherence to the Palmer copybook style was enforced. I remember learning to write in script was an arduous task. No matter how hard I tried, it was difficult to form the letters according to the teacher's instructions. To this day, I do not feel confident in my handwriting skills. And I think for those document examiners out there, we would all agree this is beautiful writing, right? It's some of the junk we have to look at. If we saw this, we would be so happy. But this gives you an idea of somebody who writes very nicely, who still does not feel confident because of the way we were tortured as children. Okay, and this was a source of error, paired incorrectly 5 times, and there's the correct association with that one. Again, nearly perfect copybook, Palmer handwriting. Okay, so how did we do? There were some problematic samples due to limited amounts of writing, and we determined limited, if for this particular study, became 20 words or less. Many examiners, although they answered it, they would make notes that if this was a real case, they would never make a call on it in real life. And here's the limited ones. There were 3 associated with errors. However, there were 3 more that were also fewer than 20 words that were not sources of error. No problems on those 3. I'd like to thank Dr. Caliguri. Don't you hate seeing your picture on a slide? Who was extremely helpful in helping me mine the data, had all these scores and all this data, and I brought it to him and said, but what does it mean? So he prepared lovely statistical charts and graphs and formulas, which are published in the paper, if you like that sort of thing. And I'm really grateful to him. But the findings we came up with was that there was no significant correlation between experience of the examiners and their accuracy. There was, however, a significant correlation between where the examiners were geographically located. We divided them into North America and non-North America, North America being the United States and Canada, and non-North America being everybody else from Europe and the Netherlands and Australia. And so that seemed to factor in, and there was certainly a correlation, a significant correlation between the number of words in a question document and the accuracy. Okay, this study has been published in the Journal of the American Society of Question Document Examiners in 2009. We were able to conclude that despite limitations in the specimen writing, the forensic document examiners did still perform with a high degree of accuracy. The group of document examiners was able to attribute authorship correctly with an average score of 98%, and peer review increased that accuracy rate to 100%. Our findings did support that document examiners should continue to show caution if they're examining documents from other countries, and, of course, if they are examining documents of shorter length, which is fewer than 20 words. When I first gave this presentation, I had an idea to possibly solicit laypersons to undergo the same exercise and see how they would perform. I'm in the process of doing that, and I had about 25 college students take this test, if you will, and they're faring much worse than the forensic document examiners. So far, they're averaging out at about a 70% score, accuracy score, whereas the document examiners averaged out at 98%. So there is a big difference, as Dr. Cam told us earlier, between lay people and what they see versus forensic document examiners and what they see. Okay, I have a lot of people to thank. Certainly the students of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. I'm deeply grateful to the 49 document examiners who participated and underwent this testing. Certainly to Dr. Caliguri, because he's much smarter than I am and knows exactly what to do with all this data. And certainly to all of you for your attention and allowing me to present this research. And I would like to end with a beautiful scenic shot of yet another bridge in Brooklyn. This is the Verrazano Bridge at the entrance to New York Harbor, and should be no doubt why they call it Bay Ridge Sunset Park. Thank you. Questions? Donna.
So the people who like to criticize all of our studies, have you gotten the criticisms yet?
I've heard nothing. Crickets. I hope they're tuned in. Jane.
What resolution did you use to scan your documents?
600 DPI.
Thanks.
I'd love to see a follow-up study using the same data, but using machine technology to determine similar or different writers.
I'm hoping we could do that, Dr. Srihari. And I know Brian Lindblom, if he's here, had some success. He may talk to us about it tomorrow using write-on software. And I believe was very successful in reducing the error rate that the examiners with adding that software into the mix. Peter?
Did you track whether any of the 49 examiners had learned Palmer, either as in parochial or public school?
I did not. I know only anecdotally from speaking to the Netherlanders, they had not. They would call it, when I spoke with them, I met them at a conference, they would refer to it as the American writing.
Yeah. I mean, I know some other examiners who did, and I was just wondering if that familiarity, that for them it was not a foreign script.
Right, yeah. Good question. I didn't track things like that.
Many documents we get are just analyze the signature, and you had small documents were less accurate. So we have this is extremely small sample.
I think
Any research here?
No, the lowest amount, somebody just wrote a very brief line, and I believe that was a sentence with 7 words. That was my shortest question sample. Either that or one person didn't write anything, so I had nothing from that person, but the least amount I had was 7 words. Jan?
Yes. I noticed that in the writing that you showed, I didn't see any of the lowercase cursive r that I associate with the Palmer system. Did you not learn that?
We did not. And Linton, who trained me, this is all anecdotal as well, so don't take this to the bank, said in England that the speed R would be referred to as the Protestant R, and the other R was referred to as the Catholic R. Is that right, Linton? Yes. So I don't know if it had something to do with that, but I mean, this was a Catholic school, so maybe that the speed R was taboo, or I don't know.
In Texas, the Palmer system was used with the speed R, so at Catholic schools.
Right.
So,
we did not, in our drills, we did not learn that.
So I don't know that in Texas that had anything to do with it. So.
Were you guys Catholics or Protestants?
Catholics.
Oh, okay. So And I don't know if that's how, that's just anecdotal, but we didn't learn that. So, okay, well, thank you very much.
Wait, Peter.
Oh,
Peter,
wait,
Peter, have another
again.
question.
Another anecdote?
Yeah, real quick before you go, there was an online question, and you may have answered already.
That my mom,
Peter,
who went,
Peter, hold up. Yeah.
you love that, don't you?
Someone online said, "What was Dr. Sachs? What has Dr. I guess Sachs asked? What has he said about your study?" And I think you kind of answered that already.
No, nothing. I've heard nothing from him. I don't even know if he's seen it or.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Anecdotally, my mom, who learned how to write in Brooklyn around the same time as the nuns, uses today the SPEEDR.
Ah,
So it may be a secular issue.
right. Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you.